Hello, I'm Josh Strife Hayes and this is Strife Reads Writing Prompts. Today's story is part 2 of When you were 12, you began seeing two lines on the ground in front of you, red and green. You followed the green line and became hugely successful in life, but now you're bored. Time to try the red line. The following story was written by Inorai and I perform it with their kind permission. I turned back to the red line and then I broke into a run. The side door still smouldered ominously. The line blazed a trail ahead of my feet, leading straight across the sidewalk, up the narrow steps and right to the front door of the sad little building that sat squeezed between two larger structures. I skidded to a halt. The smoke was coming from the other door. Wouldn't it make more sense to check there first? But the red line was there, bright and insisting that no, this was where I needed to be. I hesitated for a moment more, doubting if I should be trusting a figment of my imagination over what my eyes and nose were telling me, and then gave up. I had already come this far. I had trusted the red line enough to follow it all the way out here, and wound up stabbing some guy wielding a gun. I was already committed. So I ignored the smoke, skidding to a stop at the front door and seizing the handle roughly. It turned about 1/4 of an inch, reminding me that yes, people in this part of town did in fact lock their doors. I swore, punching the door in frustration, and was rewarded with a sore, bruising hand. Eyeing the door angrily as I nursed my hand, I stepped back. I braced myself, picking out my plan of attack, and then I charged it, smashing my shoulder into that sweet spot I'd seen soldiers and superheroes hit in 1,000 action movies. My shoulder exploded into blinding pain to match my hand. The door remained perfectly sound in its frame. I glared at it, muttering nastily under my breath. This wasn't going to work. It was a heavy storm door in the seedy part of town, and life had been very good to me over the last few years. Bashing myself against it was just going to leave me with a broken shoulder. But then what? I panted for a second, catching my breath as I tried to calm my mind down long enough to figure out what my next move should be. A pane of glass by my head glinted red. My head snapped up, my eyes locking onto the narrow frame. There was a window set into the front of the building. It was small. Small enough that I had disregarded it entirely, but it might be close enough to get the job done. I grinned, and then I pulled my knife back out of my pocket, wrinkling my nose at the sight of it still sticky and covered in blood. A moment later, the sound of breaking glass echoed through the neighbourhood as I smashed the window with the butt of my knife. "Hey!" a voice roared, male and angry and rapidly approaching. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I glanced back over my shoulder as I knocked fragments of glass free, clearing a spot on the window frame. A man was accelerating down the street toward me, a shopping bag still clutched in his hand. A local? "Get the fuck out of here! What the fuck are you doing? You better leave right now before I call the damn cops to keep me from killing your stupid ass!" he roared, running a hand through his short, cropped black hair before pointing it angrily at me. It was as good as I was going to get it. I sighed, taking a deep breath, and then I shoved my arm through the hole I had made in the window, reaching downwards. My eyes tightened as shards of glass tore into my skin, sending drops of blood cascading down the wall. "Sure, call the cops," I hissed through gritted teeth as I stretched farther. "Call the fire department while you're at it." He stopped, a few steps away from me, and gaped, completely derailed. That wasn't what he had expected to hear. A well-timed puff of smoke blew out the now shattered window in front of me. Adrenaline kicked its way into my veins. The smoke was getting worse. The fire was building. But I could feel the metal of the door handle under my fingertips just a little further. I saw the light go on in his eyes as he stared at the smoke, and then I saw the panic seeping in around the edges. "Are they still in there?" he gasped, rushing forward to grab the door. I winced, flinching as I felt the handle slide away from me, rattling in the frame as he tugged at it. "Stop it! Yes, probably, I think so. Do you have a key?" I kept my voice even, but I couldn't keep my eyes from narrowing with irritation. He got the message, letting go of the door and jumping back, his hands rising clear. No, they didn't give anyone a spare. They had break-ins." His words fell out of him in a rush as he looked on helplessly. I nodded, too focused to talk. I could feel it again, the cold metal. It was there, right under my fingertips. I just needed a little more. With an audible click, the lock disengaged. I withdrew my arm carefully, trying to avoid pushing the glass further into it. I hadn't pulled it halfway out when the man surged back up the steps, pushing the door open in a rush. Smoke and heat billowed out, along with a cascade of sparks. Both of us froze as the dry hotness washed over us. He had stopped, his hand still half raised, caught like a deer in the headlights of a car as he stared into the building. Outside it was a typical mid-morning in fall, bright and crisp, with the last remnants of the bird population shrieking their songs and frost speckling the grass that poked up from the sidewalk cracks. But inside that building, it was a different world entirely. I swore under my breath, moving closer to get a better look. I'd hurried. I'd come straight here. The fire was so small only a few moments ago, only a few wisps of smoke escaping that side door. That was all. Apparently a few minutes was all it took. The inside of the building was blackening and dark, the air filled with thick haze of smoke. Flames danced at the back corner of the room, pressing up against a side door. The side door I had almost tried to burst through. I gulped, suddenly aware of how close I'd come to some major burns. The red line twinkled ahead of me, leading me into the building, but I couldn't bring myself to take that first step. I glanced back to the neighbourhood behind me, where a crowd was rapidly gathering. Figures. They were drawn to anything that looked interesting, and we were putting on quite the spectacle right now. The green line traced its way back down the steps, circling a few times before arcing back toward the mouth of the main road. I could be done with it. No one would blame me. I could just step back and wait for help to come. I'd still be thanked and praised for noticing the fire and trying to help. It was the smart choice, the safe choice. The green line glowed in my sight, as though insisting that I be sensible about all this. Inside the building, the sound of someone coughing managed to overcome the roar of the blaze for the moment. Fucking hell. The red line swooped in, overtaking the green as I stepped over the threshold into the burning building. The temperature shot up instantly, leaving the chilly far behind and bypassing the hot to go straight to inferno. "What the fuck, dude? You can't go in there!" The man behind me roared. I glanced back, watching him scream from the doorway. "That's a goddamn fire, you crazy son of a bitch! Wait for the fire department!" He waved his phone meaningfully as he stepped away, getting a safe distance back. His hand flapped frantically, gesturing for me to follow. I just grinned, and he stopped, his mouth dropping open, and then I kept going. The red line led me in, shining like a beacon in the thick haze that surrounded me. It wasn't a big building from the outside, just a little ramshackled old dump that might have been an old house or a storefront or an office. Its original use had been lost to decades spent in disrepair, but it hadn't looked very large. Take away the light and the air, and that small building seemed suddenly much, much larger. I wound my way through the blaze, following the line that picked out a path through the stained second-hand furniture. I could see the flames growing larger along the back wall. Something burned at the base of it, where the fire must have started. It looked like, I squinted through watering eyes, a portable heater? My mouth pressed into a thin line as I looked at the sad, charred shell of metal. It had been cold this week. Too cold, apparently. But I didn't have time to stop and see the sights. One foot in front of the other, I worked my way to the back of the room. I found them there, a man and a woman. They were older, their hair silvering and their faces lined, even though the ash began to coat their skin and clothing. "Are you okay? Can you move?" I yelled, crouching down so I was closer to them. The old man looked up at me. He was shaking, from fear or exhaustion I couldn't say, but his gaze was rock solid. "I'm fine, but Bay is hurt. I can't lift her," he screamed back, his voice thin. I frowned, looking closer. Sure enough, her leg was bent at an unnatural angle. I sighed as the pieces began to fall into place. I could see it, playing out in my head. The old couple relaxing in the back room away from the cold of the windows and the outside, with their heater warming the in-between. The fire broke out between them and the exit, and they panicked. She hurt herself, and he wouldn't leave her alone. I gritted my teeth. Their love was quite adorable, but those flames out the front grew higher every moment we wasted in here. We had to move. Looking at the old man's legs, though, wobbling like he was caught in a windstorm, I didn't have any confidence in his ability to walk out of here. I glanced back toward the exit. The red line was there, now, leading us back to the front door. But as I watched, the green line swung into view too. The two lines merged somehow, meeting and entwining with each other, until the red and the green were replaced with a single gold line that dominated my field of vision. "Figures," I muttered under my breath. "There's only one option here in the first place." I turned back around, fixing my glare onto the two of them. "All right," I howled, crouching down. "Here's the plan. Bay? Can I call you Bay? You're going to wrap your arms around my neck. Yes, tighter, just like that." Then I slid my arms under her as she gripped me tentatively, her fingers twitching and spasming in pain as I brushed her injured leg. And then I heaved, lifting her off the ground into a wedding carry. She wasn't heavy, there just wasn't much to her tiny, fragile frame. But I hadn't done much in the way of physical labour in years, nothing more strenuous than moving equipment around the lab or lifting a piece to pin in place, and usually there was someone around to lend me a hand. I gritted my teeth against my body's complaining, turning back toward the doorway. The old man turned to follow, hobbling out of his corner. The gold line led the way, one step at a time. That's all we could do. As we neared the fire, the smoke thickened again, the heat surging anew to singe my eyebrows. Bay whimpered, burying her face in my shoulder. I tightened my grip around her, shying back from the flames. The sound of coughing broke through the steady hiss of the fire. I half turned back toward the smoke-engulfed room behind us. The old man was stumbling, his face drawn and tight as he hacked. His legs finally gave out, and he fell, catching himself before he struck the concrete floor. My mind raced as I watched him, still clutching his wife in my arms. I can't carry both of them. There is no way. My arms were already leaden and heavy from holding up the old woman. There's no way I'd be able to carry both of them at the same time. Even if I could get him into a piggyback, I'd have to make a second trip. The gold line blazed in front of me, pulling me onward, but I couldn't move. My eyes were locked onto his sad, hunched form, half hidden behind the clouds of smoke. He raised his head, then, and smiled at me. My heart ached. "Hey!" I heard a voice roar from somewhere ahead. The man from before. He was still here? "Over here!" I hollered as loudly as I could. "We're over here! Help!" I could see him moving toward us, a dark shape in a dark room. And then he was there, alongside me, swearing as his eyes flicked between the woman wrapped in my arms and the flames that were reaching for the ceiling. "He needs help! Back there! Help him!" I managed, the words flying out of me. He reached for the old woman in my arms, but I jerked my head back toward her husband. My arms were already too close to giving out. If I had to pick one of them up a second time, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do it. But the man didn't hesitate. He scooped the old guy up like it was nothing, bypassing helping him up entirely. "Go!" he yelled back toward us. I didn't have to be told twice. The line was still there. I followed it without a second thought, putting one foot after another until I could see sunlight through the open door ahead. It was only a few steps, I knew that, but it felt like so much longer. Each step, a monumental effort, ignoring aching limbs and burning lungs. But it was only a few steps, and in a burst of smoke, we burst forth into fresh air at last. We stumbled down the steps, down the sidewalk, meandering ahead of us, until at last the first row of spectators rushed forward to meet us. They swarmed us, lifting the old couple free. We both flopped to the ground as the weight vanished from our arms. The sound of our coughing filled the air as we hacked black ash and wiped soot from our eyes. "You're crazy. You know that?" the old man moaned, breathing in heavy gasps while he struggled to catch his breath. I wasn't much better. "That was fucked up. Really fucked up. How'd you know? How'd you know they were in there?" I shook my head cautiously, alarm bells ringing. I knew better than to tell the truth. I just had a feeling. I lied easily. It looked hazy, you know. There was smoke coming out of the building and I heard someone calling for help. The other fellow grinned. "Well, thanks. Old George there's a real special to a lot of people. They'd be upset if he went, you know." He threw a hand out, which I accepted after a moment's pause. He shook it heartily. I flinched as the glass still jabbed into my arm shifted. "Damn, sorry. You should get that looked at." He jerked his head over his shoulder toward the rapidly rising sound of sirens. I could see the lights from the fire truck bouncing off the buildings. The last thing I wanted to deal with right now was prying questions. I gave my arm a critical look. It was ugly, but it looked worse than it was. I'd probably be able to dig the shards out with a pair of tweezers and a bit of antibiotic ointment. My mind was busy, processing events that had happened today. The red line brought me to people who needed me. Now I knew that, I couldn't very well ignore it, and so far it had been a mugging and a fire rescue. That didn't bode well for my safety. If I started showing up at half the emergencies around the city, the police were going to start getting suspicious. It wouldn't do me any good to help people out, only to get labelled as a crook myself. No, I should avoid that, and I should avoid them, to keeping a low profile. The police, the fire department, the emergency services, anyone who would notice that I was getting myself involved in things I had no business being involved with. I pushed myself to my feet as the first ambulance turned down the street a few blocks off. The man shook his head, jumping up beside me. Where do you think you're going?" he asked, disbelief colouring his voice. I smiled crookedly. "I've got some stuff I need to do. Looks like things here are taken care of, right?" He shook his head. "Like what? That arm needs to be taken care of, and you just ran into a burning building. The police are going to want to talk to you, and you inhaled a lot of smoke. Don't be a dumbass." Not going to lie, my throat and lungs were killing me, but it was manageable. I could still walk without wheezing. It would have to do for now. I looked down. The gold line was gone. The 2 lines were back, encircling me. At my feet, the red line curved sharply and ran back off down a nearby alley. I sighed. Now that I knew what the red line was, the thought of abandoning someone who needed my help made my chest ache. Granted, that may have been the smoke as well, but I had to know my own limits, or I was going to get myself killed. The green line ran in the opposite direction, back toward the familiar, back toward home. Slowly, begrudgingly, I started walking. The ground shone green beneath my feet. I was unprepared today. In every possible way, I was out of shape and unequipped to deal with anything. The memory of charging that gun-wielding mugger with a pocket knife made my stomach turn. I needed to do better. I needed to be better. In my mind, the plans were already unfolding. I needed to be stronger. Some sort of frame, a mechanical assist, and a gym membership. I had a date with a weightlifting machine if today was any indication. Some sort of drone as well, something to help me scan for dangers. I had almost gone for that side door. I had come just that close to literally playing with fire. I was completely lost in my thoughts as the ambulances and fire trucks sped up the street toward the smoking building we'd come from. The designs and plans spun in my mind's eye. I grinned despite the gravity of the situation. All of these toys that were going to be up to me to design and use. This was going to be fun. If I could find a way to explain my soot-stained clothes and bleeding arm to my wife anyway. "Hey!" the man called behind me, still angrily glaring. "If your arm gets infected and falls off, don't blame me." I grinned back over my shoulder. Fair enough. "And thank you. Thank you for saving those 2. I shrugged wistfully. I just happened to be in the right place, that's all. "Right, sure. You got a name I can call you if you don't cough up a lung and die?" I laughed despite myself. The path home stretched out ahead of me. I waved as I turned back toward the green road. My thoughts were still spinning in overdrive, dreaming of adventures and plans that were unfolding before my eyes. I wasn't bored anymore. That staleness that had seeped into my life was gone. "Ricky!" I called back. I waved as he faded into the cityscape behind me, but my friends call me Redline.